In this video, we will talk more about the ecology of seed plants. So this is just kind of a list of some of the different ecological roles that these seed plants play. So first of all, they help to stabilize soil. And so essentially their roots help to trap dirt or soil, and it helps to prevent erosion. If you've ever been to the beach, you have probably looked at sea oats or probably seen sea oats. So they're those kind of long, they almost look like wheat or kind of like a long feathery plant that's sticking up out of the dunes. And their roots can be several feet deep. And those roots really help to stabilize the dunes to keep all the sand from blowing away or eroding away into the water. Plants also play a role in the carbon cycle because remember with photosynthesis, plants decrease atmospheric carbon dioxide and they incorporate that carbon into carbohydrates, which then get eaten by other plants and animals, which then get eaten by other animals, and it moves the carbon around in the ecosystem. When a plant dies, it also gets broken down, and that carbon gets recycled into the carbon cycle. Photosynthesis also releases oxygen, so it increases atmospheric oxygen, which animals need to breathe. A lot of plants provide shelter for animals. So think about squirrels living in trees and insects and all the different critters out there in the forest. They also provide food. And so plants in general are what we call primary producers. And they essentially make up the base of the food web. And so they do this through that photosynthesis. So remember, photosynthesis takes carbon dioxide and water and produces carbohydrates and oxygen. And so those carbs form the base of the food chain. So animals come along, they eat the plants, they steal those carbohydrates, and then they're able to extract energy from those carbohydrates to perform cellular respiration. A lot of seed plants are also used for medicine, and we'll talk more about those on a later slide. A lot of seed plants are used as medicine, and we'll talk about that more on a separate slide. And then some of them are used in industry. So there might be different chemicals that are kind of pulled from a plant that are then isolated and used. Also things like textiles. So think of things like cotton. So cotton is produced by a seed plant, and a lot of our clothing is made of cotton. You can also think of things like lumber, et cetera, et cetera. So let's talk about the coevolution of plants and herbivores. So first of all, an herbivore is just an animal that eats plants. So it's basically like a vegetarian. We typically only refer to vegetarians if they're human. If they are any other animal, we call them an herbivore. They're also called the primary consumers because they are eating plants. Remember, plants are the primary producers. So the primary consumers come along, they eat the plants, and then they take that energy that the plant has captured from the sun during photosynthesis. Now, sometimes the coevolution of plants and herbivores is beneficial, meaning that the animal eats the fruit and then the seeds of the plant get dispersed. And so this is a win-win or a mutualistic relationship between the plant and the animal, because the animal gets food and the plant gets its seeds dispersed over a larger area. In other cases, it may be what we call an arms race, meaning that they are constantly evolving to try to evade the other one. So, for example, some plants have developed things like thorns and spines in order to make it painful for animals to eat them. So, this is supposed to be a deterrent for animals. But there are some birds that have these specialized beaks that allow them to get in between the thorns and spines. Or mammals with thick fur, if the spine can't get to the skin, then it doesn't bother them. Some plants have developed chemicals that give them a bad taste, but then there are some herbivores that have maybe lost the ability to taste those compounds, or they've developed an attraction to those compounds and they actually think that they are tasty. Some plants have developed tough shells or coats, sorry for the typo, or things like bark on trees. But then there are other animals that have developed or evolved these specialized mouthpieces that allows them to maybe break open a shell. Think about something like a parrot with a walnut, or they're able to maybe rip the bark off to get to what's underneath it. So here's one specific example of a mutualistic symbiosis. And mutualistic means that it is a win-win relationship. So both organisms are going to benefit. And so we're looking at Mexican acacia trees and acacia ants. So the tree provides the ants with the benefits of shelter. So the ants live on the tree and they nest in these large thorns, which helps to protect the ants from getting eaten by predators. The tree also provides food. So by doing photosynthesis, it can produce things like sap. And the ants, as you know, ants are attracted to sugar. And so the ants eat those sugary secretions. Now, this is also interesting because the trees, they want to keep predators away, but they don't want to keep pollinators away. And so basically the food is kind of like a deterrent for the ants, where it gives them something to eat so that they don't attack pollinators that come to pollinate the plants. The ants in return provide the tree with protection. So protection from herbivores. And so if you've ever been stung by an ant, you know that it is not pleasant. And so they can actually sting and attack different herbivores that are coming to try to eat off the tree. It also helps to protect from pathogens. So things like fungi, the ants can actually eat the fungi and break it down and prevent it from becoming pathogenic or dangerous to the tree. Now, the development of fruit, the ultimate function of fruit is just to disperse seeds. So trying to get those seeds from one place to another. And this helps to spread out the genetic material, kind of widen the gene pool, if you will. So some seeds, or some fruits, I should say, are small and feathery. So if we look at this dandelion right here, you've probably seen one of these before, and you can pick it and then you blow on it and all the little seeds are going to blow away. And so these are seeds that are dispersed in the wind. Things like a coconut, so this is a coconut here. And coconuts are buoyant, so they are actually able to float, and they typically live in tropical places with access to water. And so when a coconut falls off a tree, it's able to float along the water until it finds a different area of land to then germinate on. And remember, this coconut is just a fruit with seeds inside. Some fruit are designed to be dispersed by animals, and so the animals might eat the fruit, and then the seed might pass through their digestive tract and then come out in their poop, and then it has this nice little pile of fertilizer so it can germinate wherever it lands. Other times, animals might eat the fruit and then just drop the seeds wherever they happen to be eating that fruit. Some fruits have burrs that help them to stick to fur. And so if you have ever been hiking before, you've probably noticed that these burrs will sometimes stick to your socks and your pants, or if you've got a dog with you, it'll stick to their fur. And these burrs, they kind of act like Velcro. And once again, it's just trying to get the seed inside that fruit to be carried to a different location so that it can then find a suitable place to germinate. Some animals also gather and stash fruit and then forget where they left it. So this is a key thing with acorns here. So squirrels are notorious for going around and collecting acorns in order to be able to eat them over the winter when there isn't food readily available. But oftentimes they forget where they left the acorns. And so that acorn can then, if it doesn't get eaten, it can then germinate and form a new tree wherever it gets left by the squirrel. Flowers and pollinators have also co-evolved. And so different pollinators have different kind of characteristics that they look for in flowers in order to be able to eat from the flower and then transfer its pollen to somewhere else. So, for example, hummingbirds like large red flowers with little to no smell and funnel shaped. And so you can see this here. So this is the hummingbird. You can see these flowers have this kind of funnel shape and then the petals coming off here. And hummingbirds have this kind of long, skinny beak that it can actually stick down into the flower in order to get to the nectar. And if you've ever seen a hummingbird feeder, you know that the openings where the hummingbirds feed is usually colored red, and it usually looks like kind of this flower, this red flower, and then it's got little holes in it that the hummingbird can stick its little beak through in order to drink the nectar inside. Now, some flowers bloom at night, and these are plants that are pollinated by things like moths and bats, which are more active at night. And so this right here, this is a saguaro cactus. And I had these all over when I lived in Phoenix, Arizona. And they make these really pretty white flowers during certain times of the year. And these flowers primarily bloom at night, and their main pollinators are actually bats. Now, things like bees, they like these kind of wider, more open flowers. So you can see this picture here where we've got our bee. And you can see that this flower is the petals are very open and it's kind of flat so that the bee can easily get to the nectar in the middle and it picks up the pollen, which are on these stamen around here. So these little structures here are the stamen. As humans, we also benefit significantly from seed plants. So once again, they form the base of our food chain. So they're the primary producers because they do photosynthesis. And then the primary consumers go and eat the primary producers. And remember, the primary consumers are also called herbivores, or in humans, we call them vegetarians. Now, a secondary consumer eats a primary consumer, and the secondary consumer is going to be the carnivore that eats the herbivore. Now, an omnivore can eat at both the primary producer and primary consumer level. But ultimately, what's happening is this transfer of energy. So energy is being transferred from the primary producer into the primary consumer and then into the secondary consumer. So even if you have a mostly meat diet, the energy in the meat that you're eating came from the plants that the animal that you're eating was eating. We also produce alcohol through the fermentation of fruit. So think about things like grapes, for example. Seed plants also produce a lot of lumber. This lumber or this wood can be used as lumber for construction. It can be burned as a fuel, etc., etc. We also make paper and other textiles, such as clothing, from products that come from seed plants. So an example would be cotton. Seed plants are also ornamental. So we like to plant flowers in our garden, or we buy flowers, cut flowers, for a friend that they can put in a vase. And so they're just pretty and we enjoy them. Seed plants also play a really important in the field of medicine. So these are just some examples of compounds that we get from different plants and how we use them in a medical context. So a plant called deadly nightshade produces a compound known as atropine. And atropine is what are in the eye drops that they put in your eyes when you go to the eye doctor so that it can dilate your pupil so that they can see the retina by kind of looking through the pupil into the back of your eye. A plant called foxglove produces digitalis, and digitalis is used to treat heart disease and it helps to stimulate a heartbeat. The plant called ephedra makes ephedrine, which is a strong decongestant and bronchial dilator. So this is helpful for people with asthma or people that are really congested from maybe a sinus infection. The Pacific yew produces something called Taxol, and this is really interesting to me. This is actually used in cancer chemotherapy. So it's actually used to treat some cancers. I think it's mostly reproductive cancers. So it helps treat breast cancer and testicular cancer, ovarian cancer, et cetera, et cetera. And it inhibits mitosis because remember, cancer is just uncontrolled cell growth. So it's just mitosis that's happening without any regulation. And so this compound stops mitosis in order to stop the cancer or the tumor from growing. Poppies are also known as opium poppies. They produce opioids, and these are analgesics, which are basically pain reducers. They are also narcotic, and so these are often abused, unfortunately, as kind of a prescription drug that people become addicted to. But they are really powerful and they are really helpful to people who are in pain and need that pain relief. The quinine tree produces a compound known as quinine, and it's mostly known for being an anti-malarial. And so if someone has malaria, this compound can help to treat it. It also is an antipyretic, which means that it lowers body temperature. So if someone has a fever, it can reduce a fever. And the willow plant produces salicylic acid, which produces this pill that we know as aspirin. But salicylic acid is actually in a lot of different things. So it's an analgesic, which just means that it's a pain reliever. It's antipyretic, which means that it reduces fever. It's also found in some kind of topical treatments for skin. So a lot of acne treatments have salicylic acid in them. Wart removers also have salicylic acid. It's a very diverse compound that can be used in a lot of different applications.